Good evening. Namaskar, Jai Hind, everybody. Welcome to the next edition of Strategic Dialogue, sponsored by Strive. A Strive think tank based in Lucknow regularly conducts these dialogues basically with the intention of updating everyone's knowledge, bringing good discussion right onto the table. And today we're going to discuss Indo-China. And of course, as we discuss India-China, we're also going to be talking about the capability of the PLA, the current status of relationship, the way it's going to go, and what is the future as far as the Chinese nation is concerned. And to bring this discussion right in front of you, we have an expert in China, Major General Mandip Singh. After about serving for about 30 years, 38 years, Major General Mandip Singh, Sena Medal, Vishit Seva Medal, is currently a distinguished fellow at the USI. He is also a senior fellow at the Manohar Parrikar IDSA, where he previously headed the East Asia Center. He is the visiting fellow at the Mercator Institute of China Studies in Berlin, Germany, and a visiting faculty at the ITBP Academy, Missouri, BSF Academy, DSSC Wellington, Naval War College, the Air War College, Punjab University, and Allahabad University. And on top of all this, he's also the president of the Dronacharya drone company, which is now out as a public company and is doing extremely well in the market. Welcome on board, Mandi.
Thank you very much, sir. Deeply honored by this introduction and also to be on this show. Strive, I believe, great initiative by all of you veterans. I'm sure there'll be an interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to it.
Right, Mandi. Now, when we start, you see, we keep talking about Indo-China relations. We talk about the standoffs. We talk about disagreements on Depsang and Demchok, with China giving conditions which India is unwilling to accept. Our insistence that without normalcy at the border, there can be no normalcy in diplomatic ties. India has begun moving westward, something we never did, joining anti-China groupings. Possibly, we could be a member of the NATO Plus Club. We're enhancing ties with the Quad, growing closer to the US, conducting exercises with ASEAN, selling BrahMos missiles to every Chinese adversary, challenging Chinese hold in the Pacific and Africa, pushing away Chinese influence in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, and Bangladesh. One statement that of possible reason for us to convert the SCO from an in-person summit to a virtual mode is because we no longer want to give preference to China-dominated organizations. The G statement of decoupling from China will benefit, the G7 statement of decoupling from China will benefit India. And on these issues, there have been scathing articles coming out by the Global Times. How do you view the future of our relations?
Right. So let me just start by saying that the India-China relations are actually there are four major issues that kind of are important factors in the relationship. The first, of course, is the border issue. That's lingering, and we'll talk about it a little later, and I'm sure that's going to be most of the discussion today. The other is China's support to Pakistan, including the CPEC, and now, of course, it's become a party to the J&K dispute, willy-nilly become a party to the J&K dispute. The third is the contestations in the south, in South Asia, especially a Himalayan neighborhood, and the Indo-Pacific. And the fourth issue, I think, would be the growing trade imbalance and Chinese protectionism, which is becoming, with each passing day, more difficult as the trade imbalance grows. So if I were to kind of put the relationship, it would be in these four categories. But where's it going? So you pointed out a number of recent developments and indicators. Let me just try and put everybody up to speed and to what's been happening recently. In the diplomatic sphere, the our Act East policy has become much more muscular than it was. It's raising eyebrows in China, and with the recent visit of the Prime Minister to the Pacific island countries, indeed that has caused some consternation in China. Uh, there's no gainsaying with the increasing relevance of Quad, the kind of meetings that are happening. We are still short of securitization, but it is the increased meetings, the kind of agendas that are being discussed in Quad, which is also causing a concern to China. Some even believe that this unease is one of the possible causes for giving India a knock in Ladakh in 2020. And this perception of leaning onto the US, a number of things have happened. There's a 2+2 dialogue. There's this I2U2. Then those three foundational agreements that were signed, SISMA, BICA, LSA, huge amount of equipment sales, joint exercises with the land, sea, special forces, and increased interaction. In fact, today, as we speak, the US Defense Secretary has just come into India and they're laying the grounds for the Prime Minister's visit there. So there would be something coming out of that too. So that has kind of, uh, made the Chinese believe that we are now leaning towards the United States. Otherwise, if you look at the diplomatic side, also it's not business as usual. While one notices the coldness in the SCO, you see there was no handshakes. The defense minister made that statement that this engagement will logically will be followed by this de-escalation. And that standard response that we are seeing that India must take a long view of the whole thing, and that the situation is stable. That's what Li Shangpu said, but it's far from stable. And even our foreign minister was very categorical. He said it's not business as usual. Um, uh, what one is noticing is that with every meeting, there is the kind of message that we are getting from the Chinese is that this is the border is stable. This is a normalized management of the border now, as if there is a new normal, and that we should what has happened and move forward, which is not acceptable and which is very very categorical as far as the Indian leadership is concerned. Aside from that, you see developments happening around in Bhutan. Suddenly, you find the 11th and the 12th experts group meeting is just within 4 months. They're talking about settling the border dispute. You find a greater presence in Nepal. There's the rail link, the border trade is open, etc. You find an increased presence in Sri Lanka and Maldives as well. Um, Sinopec, I think, has just signed a deal for petrol for about 150 petrol bunks there. So that will be a competition to the old to Indian oil. So what we see is in the diplomatic side, if you see on the political side, there is an increased friction and developing between the two. And on the military side, there is no development as far as the corps commanders talks are going. It's not going anywhere insofar as Dipsang and Demchok are concerned. In fact, the standoff at Yangtze on 9th of December hasn't in any way helped in sorting out. In fact, it has only aggravated the situation.
Mandeep, here is where I want to just interject a bit. You've
Uh,
been talking earlier when we were discussing on what the Chinese did along the LAC was something which was as per their book or their thought process or their doctrine. Can you give that thought to our viewers?
In fact, sir, it's amazing. Uh, there's a lot. Many of us don't read the Chinese publications. There's the Science of Military Strategy 2020, Chapter 7, Section 3. We must read it. It's about handling military crisis. And when I say that he is going actually by the copybook, it's written there. And what does it say? And it talks about three, four issues about handling military crisis like the one on the border. The first thing he says is when there is a crisis, there should be six important factors to be considered. The first is the goal. The goal or the aim is to give greater leeway to the adversary, but not given without a principle. And that is the reason why the Chinese keep harping on, let's first get the principles right. The second thing is the domain of the field. The teaching is very clear. He says, isolate the crisis. Don't let it go into other domains. Thirdly, he says, contain the scope. Don't let it internationalize. Don't let it expand further. Fourth is the method. Method is interesting. He says, negotiations. Negotiations must be peaceful. But if it's not working, and that's an interesting, it says, use coercion like sanction, embargoes, blockades, and ultimatums with caution. So this is very much a part of the playbook. Fifthly, control the intensity. The intensity means your response should be equal to the adversary. It should not be lesser in no way, but it should not be excessive either. And the sixth interesting thing is that you must control the rhythm, the spread. It should not spiral out of control. In fact, and what he says is when you look at the what about the impact? He says the impact on such a crisis can be two ways: either by a direct intervention, which is getting in directly, or even an indirect intervention, using an outside agency or an outsider to help in solve the crisis. But the interesting part is that the guideline to a commander is that he must be proactive. And he says whether you are in the communicating or not, you must take advantage of the opportunity if it presents. You must make profit from such a incident if the conditions are favorable. And lastly, you can advocates that you can use border crises to deflect political pressure. So that's very
It's,
interesting.
in
And
fact,
the last point in the playbook says, and this very clearly says, is that if the crisis is long, if it is prolonged, if the settlement is going to take time, then there are two ways of handling it. One is called cold shelving. Cold shelving means just freeze it for some time. It can be discussed at an appropriate time, or leave it for later generations, as we keep hearing the Chinese saying. But the other interesting thing is hot shelving. And hot shelving is when it says keep the issue alive, keep the pressure on, keep the controversy on, keep the pot boiling. And so when I read this and when I see what the book says, and I try to connect with what's happening, uh, I do believe that this entire whatever is happening on the LSE is as per the teaching and the copybook.
I think you're very right. And now, when we're talking about the LAC and the way the scenario is, uh, when you look at it, we've been hearing a lot about building of infrastructure by the Chinese. India is catching up. Of course, we have a long way to go. They've got those air conditioned or those warm heated accommodation, the works. We talk about the Chinese being a technologically superior force, but at the same time, it's we who are in prepared defenses, who are ready for an offensive at any time. In this technological age, no matter what infrastructure you have, you still have to build up forces for a war. You cannot plan an offensive with what you have and you cannot be surprised. These small scale incidents, yes, you can be surprised, but not across the board. Ultimately, when you come down to the battle, it's going to be on the soldier behind the weapon. You've written a very interesting article on the PLA or on the soldier behind the weapon. How would you rate that? How would you rate the PLA soldier as along also, compare him to what the Indian army is like?
Okay, sir. So I do believe you're alluding to this recent piece I had written. Yeah. So let me just kind of list out the comparisons as I read. But before that, it's important to note that Xi Jinping himself has, in recent years, been expressing doubts about the capabilities of the leadership of the PLA. In fact, if I were to quote him, he says, there's a need to cultivate a new type of high quality and professional military personnel who are competent and professional and possess both integrity and ability. Now, coming from the from Xi Jinping himself, it does give you a lot of indications on the lack of faith in the commanders. In fact, there are some mentions, which talk about what is called the two big gaps and the two inabilities. The two big gaps being the gap between the ongoing revolution in military affairs and the other world army's capabilities, and the second being the ongoing revolution in military affairs and the requirement of security of China. So these are the two big gaps which are still to be bridged. And the second aspect about two inabilities, he says, is that there is the inability of the capability to fight a modern war, as also to command an army in modern war. So these are some interesting things about the PLA that even the leadership has been searching for answers. But get back to the soldier himself. Let's look at the PLA soldier. The PLA soldier is a conscript. Conscription happens twice a year, in March and September. Vis-a-vis an Indian soldier, he's a volunteer. Not that to say that conscription is a must in China now. Now there are far too many, and I think at last count about 11 million boys or youngsters girls and boys would turn about 18 per year, and the requirement of the PLA is about 3 to 4 lakhs. So I stand corrected, 11 lakhs. While you can say conscription, but really there is no conscription. The second aspect is that it's not a preferred career option. It's not a preferred career option in China. And so, therefore, most children, or boys or girls who are joining the PLA are actually looking at the advantages of this 2 years to get a seat of their choice in a college or a university of their choice. Very few actually follow the route of becoming professional soldiers, that is the NCO's route or the officer's route, after 2 years. Majority serve for 2 years and get out after 2 years. Whereas in our side, at the moment at least, it is minimum service is 15 years. So there's a security that is inherent in your commitment to your nation. The basic military training of a Chinese soldier is only 3 months. An Indian soldier is 6 months. Now you can just imagine, if you're you've got a turnover of approximately 25% in a year. And in March and in September, if you're a section commander and every 6 months, 2 or 3 of your riflemen are changing over, or your tank crews are changing over, or your gun crews are changing over, you are, perpetually in training mode. Because there is, you do not know when a guy who's exiting, whether he will continue or not. And so therefore, the backbone of the PLA today is the NCO Corps. There are 900,000 of them, incidentally. So these kids who come, they are little emperors. Now, of course, they've opened out this one kid norm, but that's going to take some time. People whom I've met and when I was in China myself, when I asked them this question, would you like a second child? No. It's very expensive. Living is very, very tough. Both of husband and wife have to work. Who's going to look after a second child? And so these little emperors are grown up as spoiled kids. They are the gizmo kinds, and therefore they're that that 4-to-1 factor we talk about, 4 grandparents for 2 parents with one child, and so therefore that sacrifice of that one child, what will happen to the 6 others that he's looking after, etc. That these are realities. They're actually fact. Chinese soldiers come from nuclear families. There is no relationship. Our soldiers there is a support system. There is a family, which is a support system there. Our a lot of our men know that whatever happens, they will be taken care of. So there is, when you look at the spirit of sacrifice, there is, an Indian soldier doesn't have a doubt in his mind at all. There's no combat experience. When did the last time the PLA fought a war? 1979. And so when you see the lack of combat experience, I actually wrote that piece when I found this line. It's a direction that's come from the CMC, which says that anybody who can't stand the sight of blood will not be enrolled or recruited into the PLA.
Yes.
No. When did the last PLA see a sight of blood? Galwan. When else did they see the sight of blood? So my view is that the impact of Galwan on the psychology of the PLA has been tremendous. And imagine that fracas that has had an impact on the complete psyche, national psyche of the PLA.
Now you were talking about the Chinese army being follow out of the Russian army. Now,
Yes.
how is that impact? I mean, in the organization structure, especially with the way Russia is struggling in Ukraine.
So, this is interesting, and one of my pieces, in fact, my study in Mercator Merrick's, where I was a visiting fellow, was this paper on comparing the Russian and the Chinese RMA. There is absolutely no doubt that the Chinese army almost entirely draws its foundations from the Russians. And so anything that is happening in Ukraine today has a direct impact on China. In fact, they're the most affected people. They would be the most worried people looking at this war. And let me, when we talk about what kind of lessons that must be drawn in PLA headquarters and in their group armies, let me put 5 strategic issues that I find, and about 5 operational issues. The first is, I think China has made 2 major underestimations. The first is the kind of degree of support that the alliance has given to Ukraine, and the second is the determination of the Ukrainian resistance. Now, when you try to extrapolate this, and they must be looking at it clearly from a prism of Taiwan, they must be very worried. The second is the ability to fight a hybrid war. I mean, this was supposed to be a short, swift war where Russian soldiers were actually carrying their ceremonial dresses in their tanks, because they said that there's going to be a parade in Kyiv in 7 days. And some of them even actually booked tables in hotels for dinner in Kyiv. So let me say that nobody imagined that. The third thing is that technology is at best a force multiplier. It's at best a force multiplier. But it's definitely the motivational levels of the defender has proven that even an overwhelmingly superior attacker can be contained. And look, it's going on for now about 470 odd days. This war is carrying on, and there's no end in sight. The fourth point at the strategic level is the complete failure of information warfare. And that is something that Chinese are are proud of, the three warfare strategies and all. Do you see how Zelensky is kind of worked through the Russian IW? And it's amazing how there's been a complete abject failure of information warfare, at least insofar as the impact on the West is concerned. Last point, I think strategically from the for the lesson would be the strategic communications. Much as you would like to blank out communications, the kind of alternatives that were thrown up with Elon Musk, his Starlink, that is something disruptive, totally different. I mean, an amazing thing could happen. Operationally, the Chinese army did away with divisions because the Russians did away with divisions and made combined arms brigades. But now what has emerged is that the Russian BTGs, the battalion tactical groups, have failed. Failed because of inadequate firepower, failed because of extended logistic support, and they are now contemplating going back to divisions. And the Chinese army only now have broken divisions and come into camps. So that is one thing that they'll be rolling back and very, very worried about.
But at the same time, Mandip, at the same time, there's also a talk of the Chinese recruiting Nepali Gurkhas. Now, that's going to have a massive impact if that goes through. But will it go through? I have my doubts, though.
No, I don't think so. You see, in my understanding, what would happen with the Nepalese is at best to act as translators or facilitators on their borders. It is well nigh impossible to imagine Nepalese citizens. I mean, they have their own issues with China, and if at best, if they were to please Nepal, they could use some of them to and send them into UN missions where they can get some allowances, get some money, and come back early. I don't foresee any of this happening, at least in large scale. It could be just for translators or managing the borders, etc. That's it.
Because you see, I mean, the thought process is coming.
Also mention some other issues.
Nepalese, who've been a part of the Indian army.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Okay. With the...
I can hear you now, sir.
Yeah. With the Gurkha veterans that the Indian army has had, it is very unlikely that any of their kith or kin are going to look at joining the PLA. It doesn't appear to be so.
I absolutely disagree with this. It's just media reports, and I don't think there are any facts to it at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. The other
could be
thought,
just a red herring also. Chinese are quite good at it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, joining those individual private companies like the Russians have got the Wagner or something, that's a different ballgame, but they're not likely to be used anywhere along the front. At the same time, the next issue that's coming in, Mandip, is what about the infrastructure development on the Chinese side and our side?
Right. So, there is a huge amount of development of infrastructure on the Chinese side. I mean, the list is endless. It's almost all over and all around. The fact is that it's happening now, and it's happening in quick pace, simply because just go back another 10. There wasn't much. There were border guarding forces over there, and they had roads, they had approaches up to the. But it is after 2013, DBO and then Chumar, where they suddenly realized that they need to do something because they've got a serious contender in the Indian army. And that things came to a head in Doklam in 2017 when they realized that they will have to they'll have to contend with a world class military. I mean, a combatized, which is very well experienced army, which is committed and highly professional. And then when 2020 happened, there's no way they could not. So yes, there has been a huge development. I would at this stage say that if you are hinting to me to say that this is because of a preparation for war, uh,
No,
I
no.
see no motivation levels. In fact, I can
There's no way. You see,
my
after all,
argument no.
but let me tell you something. Mandip, when you and me were in service, I know I'm sitting in a posted to a corporate quarter in the Northeast. When we spoke about building up roads, it was the standard perception of the top brass was no. If you construct the roads or you build up infrastructure, it might be utilized by the Chinese in operations. So with the bargain, we were the ones who were holding back.
Yeah.
And today that we've started going up, it's going to take that much of time to catch up. So we need to be prepared. But one thing good is we've taken the step and we're now moving forward. And Mandip, I know we're running out of time, but it's been class talking to you. I think the inputs that you've provided in this short period have been immense. And with your experience and with your knowledge in China, we couldn't have asked for something better, Mandip. Thanks a ton, and we're going to carry forward
Thank you
these
so much.
discussions in phase two, phase three, in more phases as we go. And we're going to add on to topics because I want to extract as much as I can from you based on your knowledge of China. I think 13 years of research, and
Yes,
that's
sir.
immense.
The 13 years.
Yeah, I said that's immense time,
Thank
and
you,
that's
sir.
something we don't want to miss about, Mandip. I mean, for Strive, it's an honor that we've had you on board and we've had this wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you, Mandip. Thank you very much for being a
Thank you,
part
sir.
of
Thank
our
you
show.
for this opportunity. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much, sir.
Mandip.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.